Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. It is so good to be back live with all of you. Hope everybody is having a good morning, staying safe out there. It seems like the road conditions down south a bit of a mess. We are in the heart of winter, which is always fun, especially with everything else going on. I'm not a big snow guy anymore, admittedly. I just think it's a hassle more than anything else. And on top of, not having the most exciting week from a CSU football standpoint, I think there's a lot of folks that are not in the best of moods. So I'm going to do my best to do a little bit of therapy session to give some context to some of the overreactions, talk about why I think it's important to strive for more and to aspire for higher than what CSU ultimately achieved this year. But you got to be realistic about the process too and understand the context of the modern game and how things work with this transfer process, having everybody essentially be an unrestricted free agent 3 times a year is inevitably going to lead to some chaos, which it does. I just think we're at a point now where we've had so much change within the transfer portal the last couple years that everybody essentially has to accept that you are going to both gain and lose multiple starters every single cycle. There are going to be some years where it's better than others. There are going to be some years where it's worse. This is the game now. And I think we maybe get a little bit of structure once the schools ultimately start paying their players and they have revenue sharing, which we don't have now. It's obviously all funded by the collectives and fans and private donors and all that kind of stuff. Once we have a little bit more structure to it, I think you'll see some tinkering with the contract process and all of that and add a little bit of structure to the free agency, kind of like you have in the NFL. If we want it to be pro football, that's fine. But you need the regulation and that pro football has, and you need the structure of the calendar, because right now what you have is just chaos. Certainly some factors that tie into that, including the academic calendar. But I do think there's a lot that you can improve, and that as a whole, what we have right now is probably not the best thing for the overall health of college football, for the interest. Certainly it's a frustrating process for so many of us that have lived and breathed college football for years and years. And now it just feels like year after year, we see more changes that benefit the bigger schools. We see programs like CSU. I don't want to say they're getting delegated to like a minor league role, because I think that's a bit of an over exaggeration. CSU, comparatively to a lot of group of 5 programs, has done pretty good when it comes to retaining their top talent. And again, this is an issue everywhere. I'm openly a guy that roots for Alabama football, probably less so in the future without Nick Saban. He was my tie to them. I'm a big Saban guy. Him and Sonny, those are my heroes. But I mean, when you look at Alabama and when they're losing Caleb Downs to Ohio State, they're losing Isaiah Bond to Texas, and you're seeing that even those schools have a hard time hanging on to some of their impact guys. It just kind of is what it is, guys. There's going to be a lot of movement each and every cycle. It's not necessarily an indictment on your program. It doesn't mean that the sky is falling, that you need to tear everything down, that it's all, it's all going to hell. You got to keep perspective here and just understand, like, this is what the game is. And I just don't understand why I've seen so many crazy responses to this. There was a Barstool Mountain West tweet that said, is Norvell on the hot seat because of what's happened of late? Because they lost a couple of defensive guys that want to follow their DC, because they lost a receiver to Cincinnati for $400K, because Chad Savage went to USC. That's the top of the food chain, guys. There isn't a coach in the country that's going to turn down an opportunity to go to SC. Chad had other offers over the last couple of years. He chose to stick around. If you are an elite recruiter in Southern California and you have an opportunity to coach at USC, that makes all the sense in the world. He wants to be a head coach someday. I don't understand some of the reactions to this. Aaron in the Toyota chat says, some of our players are leaving, then we will snag someone from another school. So what now? If we get desperate and J Mike is forced to suit up, then we're screwed. It might happen. I might have to get the suit and tie on and make myself seem more fancy. Maybe that'll help the message come through, and it'll get people to calm down every now and then. But I don't think the people that want to tear it all down, and I almost said burn it all down, but it feels inappropriate given what's happening out in Los Angeles. So prayers to them. I know that's a little sidetrack, but the people that want to tear this all down, do you really understand what you're asking for in the current state of college football? Most programs aren't we're going to flip this in one cycle situation. It was incredible to see some of the success that I didn't see coming. That, obviously you look at a program like CU, I think they're the portal example that everybody loves to flip to. Not everybody has a generational quarterback that's the son of the coach and, a number one pick coming over with them, a Heisman winner. It's not basketball where you sign 2-3 impact players in one cycle and all of a sudden it's a night and day. Like if you're asking to burn this down, you are going to see so many guys walk out that door, so much young talent that you brought in, that you're developing, and you might lose some of them down the line anyways. But the Jordan Rosses of the world, the Tanner Morleys of the world, they're all out if you burn it down. And I need a little bit of logic when it comes to some of these takes. And that's not to say that you can't be critical. That's not to say that you can't be skeptical, because I've pointed out there is some validity to the takes that people have had when it comes to not showing up in the biggest games. A lot of the wins have come against teams with losing records. They've been a lot better at home than on the road. Like, there are things that they need to continue to improve on, but you don't fire a coach when they produce the first winning season in 7 years. That's just not how this works. It's not realistic. You went from 3 wins to 5 wins to 8 wins. That is tangible growth. That's improvement. This needs to be the floor and not the ceiling. Again, you essentially have rebuilt the program back to a competitive standpoint, and now the hope is that you go on and achieve even more after this. I'm not saying this is it. We're done. Mission accomplished. Certainly you want to see CSU go on and achieve more, but you got to be realistic about what that timetable looks like. You've got to understand that you're going to have a couple steps forward, then some steps back, just because it's hard to retain talent. It's hard to establish continuity, which traditionally was the way you built up a program in years past. So much has changed. I will say Chad Savage leaving, probably a bigger loss than any of the individual transfer departures. I just think his presence in the program was huge, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. We're going to get into the portal departures, talk about what they mean for the rest of the roster, talk about some of the additions as well. I'll get to your questions, comments. We're starring some in the back. Keep them coming. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. We'll talk hoops tomorrow. By the way, CSU men's basketball obviously throttled Fresno State. Back-to-back games where they've really just mopped the floor with someone that I thought would at least be frisky. And the funny thing about Fresno State, you look at what they've done recently, they have been fairly competitive within the league. Same thing with San Jose State. Gave New Mexico and Utah State a game. They've had a couple teams on the ropes, and CSU's really just beat them down. Really figuring things out on the defensive side, starting to get a little bit more contributions across the board offensively as well. So again, we'll talk more hoops tomorrow. Got a big home game coming up against UNLV on Saturday. Before I get into the rest of all this, I did briefly just want to touch on an update for me. If you follow me on Twitter, you've probably already seen it. There's going to be some hockey coverage on your timeline now as well. I'm still going to be hosting the Rams pod full-time, still covering CSU football, CSU men's hoops. I will always be talking CSU full-time for you guys. We've had some shuffling going on in the company, obviously, over the last couple months. They needed a little bit of help from a beat reporting standpoint on that Avs beat. Was an opportunity for me to kind of do something else. I'm excited. I'm excited to dip my toes into it a little bit, maybe see some playoff hockey action. I have had some questions, though, about, does this mean I'm transitioning out of CSU or something like that? Absolutely not. If anything, we're going to have more written CSU content than ever. I'm really excited about it. But I just wanted to give a little bit of context there, let everybody know I'm not going anywhere. I appreciate the support so much. I know a lot of you guys subscribe to DNVR specifically for my CSU coverage. That will still be a thing. I've got a ton of recruiting pieces that I'm working on right now. I'm a little bit behind on hoops, admittedly, but about to dive full in on that as well. I've been watching a lot of college basketball, catching up with the rest of the league. Never stops when I'm living the dream. And I appreciate you guys so much for making all this possible. We're going to take a quick break real quick. We're going to shout out some partners that make all of this possible. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up in the Toyota chat here on YouTube, I certainly would appreciate it. Real quick, I do want to talk to you guys about Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. What Game Time Picks does, it filters out all the fluff. Game Time has more variety. They offer more tickets than anybody out in the game. That can be a little bit overwhelming at times because there are so many tickets to sift through. Game Time, they made it easier. They add this little curation function. Boom, going to show you the best of the best bang for your buck, best price, all of that. It factors all of that into the equation. What's awesome about Game Time is they've got tickets for everything: sports, theater, comedy, you name it. Maybe you want to take the missus down to the DCPA, catch a show. Maybe you want to go see Nate Bargatze or a stand-up comedian, something like that. Check out Game Time. They've got deals for everything you're into. You name it, they've got it. And again, that Game Time Picks curation feature has made it easier than ever. Game Time offers all-in pricing, a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. And what's awesome is you can rest assured knowing that you are not going to get hit with a bunch of last-minute fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute ticket, the lowest price is guaranteed. I also want to shout out Toyota, proud partner of CSU Athletics, the official vehicle of DNVR. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. I could use a truck right now, to be honest. Toyota has built durable legends destined for greatness, perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you, like the all-new Tacoma. Check out the Land Cruiser. They've got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, which is perfect. For Colorado, that all-wheel drive just comes in clutch, especially on days like today, snowy, windy, maybe not a blizzard, but just having that little bit of extra traction goes a long way. They've got 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from. So if you're trying to live green, they give you more options than anybody on the market. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Reed in the Toyota chat says, is Savage leaving officially? Yes, I have confirmed that. I have reached out to him. He is going to USC. That has not been announced by the school. There's some weird politics from a HR standpoint that come into play with these coaches. They're allowed to be on campus and technically be working for a school, but they can't, like the universities can't make the announcement until behind the scenes all of the paperwork goes through. It's a bit of a weird process. Most other industries, you wouldn't even be able to start working. It's like a loophole that you're able to do with athletics. But yes, he is officially USC bound. It won't be the only change with the staff on the offensive side. I think we're going to get some news there in the next couple of days. I, for months, have said that I don't think Jay Norvell will add an offensive play caller. He was an OC. That's how he came up in this industry. He's always called the plays going back to his time at Nevada. I just had a hard time seeing him give it up. Based on what I'm hearing now, I do think there will be a play caller. Maybe he's called the OC. Maybe he's called something else, passing game coordinator, whatever. But I do believe that there will be a play caller. I think there's a possibility that it ultimately ends up being Matt Mummy. I'm not reporting that on an official capacity, but I am saying that is what I'm hearing, is that he will add a play caller. And if I had to take a guess as far as who that leading candidate would be, I do think it would be Mummy as of now. I did not think that after the bowl, did not think that a month ago, but that is what I anticipate. We shall see here in a couple of days. Again, not reporting that, not saying officially, they're hiring an OC, but that is what I anticipate happening moving forward. And I think we'll get some more information on that. As far as the staff goes this week, we've seen some news as far as some defensive coaches joining Tyson Summers as well, bringing over a cornerbacks coach from Washington State, safeties coach coming over from WKU. We'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. Again, as we get more information, I'll try and make it clear. I can only say so much as of now, but that is kind of what I'm hearing, and I'm just trying to keep everybody in the loop as best as I can without leading you astray. almost went out and came out really bold with some more information that I'm hearing, but I want to make sure we're 100% correct. But at this point, I do think that there will be an OC in 2025 on the defensive side. Josh here says in the Toyota chat, is Pilipel staying, the linebackers coach? He is, as of now, anticipated to be back for next season. Things can change. Obviously, a week ago, you still thought Chad Savage would be back, and then USC comes into the picture. Things can shift in a hurry. One coach gets hired at one school, which creates an opening like on down the line. There's a chain reaction there. I don't want to say definitively because there's just a lot that can happen between now and the beginning of the season. But yes, that is what is expected going into next year, is that both Pilipel and Chuka, the defensive line coach, will both be back, which is great from CSU's standpoint. I think those guys are both really, really intelligent and bright coaches that are going to coach at a high level someday. And I think that's big just from a maintaining relationship standpoint. You've got some intriguing young talent coming in via the portal as well as through the high school ranks. And, I think Pilipel and Chuka, they've been a big part of that. And I think just having them, not having to have a completely new staff defensively is big. I mean, it's going to be a lot of new players anyway, so maybe it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I think those guys are good coaches, so you want to retain them. Getting back on track, talking about Savage specifically, he's such a big loss from a recruiting standpoint. I mean, he dominates the West Coast especially, but Southern California is an area where he just thrives. That's why it was surprising to me that it took a program like USC this long to open their eyes as they've watched Savage swipe dudes from their backyard over and over again. I just figured that a school like USC, like Washington, like UCLA would eventually come to their senses and then go after him aggressively, which is obviously what happened. He'll be the inside receivers and tight ends coach at USC, but certainly have to imagine more than anything what he is being brought into that program to do is to recruit, and to recruit Southern California especially. Also has strong ties throughout the Pacific Northwest. Arizona is an area he's really locked into. Nevada as well. He's from Reno, obviously coached at Nevada under Norvell. He's a big loss. Now, I will say, I think it's big that you have a GM in place. Having Alex Collins come over from Ole Miss, I think that kind of eases this process a little bit. Maybe you lean on his connections. Maybe it's James Finley that gets promoted to recruiting coordinator, the tight ends coach, another guy who is largely in the program to recruit and is great at it. Great players coach, great at maintaining some of those relationships with the guys in the locker room. Players like LB, like I think Finley's a big reason a guy like LB ultimately comes back. He's got a ton of ties throughout Los Angeles and California as well. I could see him being elevated in some capacity. Maybe Jay reaches back out to Eric Scott, who's a guy who coached with him at Nevada. Again, maybe it's a connection from Collins, but that's the tough part, is not only do you have to replace your receivers coach, but you're replacing one of your lead recruiters. And that's where you really feel the loss of a guy like Savage. Excited for him. Think it's a great opportunity. Think he's absolutely going to murder it at USC, especially from a relationship standpoint. I think he's a guy that could be a successful head coach down the line. Has never called plays or anything like that. You don't necessarily have to become a head coach, but usually that's the trajectory that you take. So we'll see what ultimately happens down the line. Maybe he ends up back at CSU in a different role and someday, but you're going to feel that loss, and it's definitely significant. I think losing Savage matters more than any of the players individually. You have lost some good players, especially on the defensive side. Offensively, in terms of transfers, at least, I mean, you're losing multiple starters in the line, which is potentially a tough situation. I'll get into that here in a little bit. I think O-line and D-line are probably the biggest priorities in terms of where they need to bolster the depth moving forward. But offensively, I feel like CSU improved in terms of what was gained versus what was lost. Defensively, we'll see. At corner, I think you're in a good spot. They have gotten really athletic at cornerback in a hurry. Even losing, I think Karan Prunty is his name, who North Carolina A&T transfer corner, who I think actually was going to be really good. His ceiling was pretty high, athletic freak. Former Kansas corner, committed to CSU at one point. Ultimately signed with Wake Forest. I know some fans have been frustrated with how all that's played out, and I do understand that. Freddie he's had some success getting some guys to follow him, both Gabe Kershke and Newer Gatku signed with Wake Forest. They flip Prunty, and I expect that Chase Wilson will land at Wake and follow Freddie as well. It would surprise me at this point if he ends up anywhere else. I have not spoken to Chase Wilson. That's speculation on my part based on context and the fact that I do know that Freddie has pretty openly reached out to all these guys and asked them to follow him wherever he went. Some of these guys have ultimately chosen to. Boom Jock goes to Cal. He doesn't make the trip, but it would surprise me if Chase Wilson does not end up at Wake Forest. He is a significant loss. He's a great player. He's a great leader inside that locker room, been highly productive for you the last 2 seasons, really going back to that 2022 Senior Day win over New Mexico where he had 2.5 sacks, 7 tackles. DeQuan Jackson goes to the podium, crowns him the future of the defense. I think he misses leadership more than anything because as productive as he's been a solid linebacker. I think you can replicate what Wilson has done fairly. I don't want to say easily because again, he's a good player, but I think you can replace, what you're losing there. Jacob Ellis, for instance, comes over from Iowa State. I think Jacob Ellis is capable of filling the role that Chase did. I'm really excited about Owen Long, Drew Rodriguez as well, but especially Owen Long. He's lengthy. He's a great athlete, sideline to sideline, really rangy. Even before Chase announced that he was leaving, I posted in my 25 predictions for 2025 that I think Owen Long will lead CSU in total tackles this year. It's a bummer. You would have liked to see him move on. I don't think this is a situation where you need to panic because I do think you can replace his production. And also, I think it's a situation that kind of makes sense. He had been in the program for 5 years. He has his degree. All of his teammates that he's been with, for the most part, are graduating and moving on. So it's going to be a completely new cast around him, a lot of transfers and young players, a new defensive coordinator, which is potentially a gamble. And I think it's possible that he just decided if I'm going to have to learn a new defense anyways, maybe I see what else is out there. I've been at CSU for half a decade. He's a Colorado kid. Maybe he simply wants to get out of state and explore some other parts. I mean, you got to remember these kids are, 21, 22 years old. Like they want to see what else is out there too. He was really loyal to Freddie. He always has been. That's why I think he'll end up at Wake Forest with him. But it's going to be okay. They're pretty solid at linebacker. I know they're recruiting some more linebackers as well. Like there's a WKU transfer in the portal that I think they'll pursue pretty heavily, just given his familiarity with Tyson Summers. I saw they recently offered a kid out of Wofford as well. So, I mean, I think you're going to be okay at linebacker. I like what they've done at corner. Again, offensively, I think you're in a really good spot. I'm going to talk about all that and more. I'll get to your questions, your comments, your concerns. Keep them coming here. I will get to as many as possible before we get out of here. I do want to shout out our other partners real quick who encourage you to choose a chill mindset. I know you know what I'm talking about. Of course, Coors Light. There's a lot going on. I have been personally struggling with finding that balance of late due to a really annoying property management company that's been jacking me around, and I'd end up in court. It's going to be a whole thing, but don't want to get too worked up. Don't want to be a bummer to be around. It's all about choosing a chill mindset, taking your deep breaths, getting exercise, doing what you got to do to be a chill guy. Then when you're in that right place, crack open an ice cold Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Mountain cold refreshment, crisp and refreshing as the Rockies. Choose chill this winter, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I also want to shout out the homies at Circle K. It's that time of year. There's a lot going on. Maybe you're taking kids to sports. Maybe you're doing some post-holiday shopping. Just feels like life gets busy in January. Circle K is the best spot to hit up when you need a snack, when you need to fill up, obviously. They've got the best deals in town, and when you sign up for the Circle K Inner Circle with the Circle K app, you're going to receive 25 cents off per gallon for your next 5 fill-ups. You drive an SUV or something, I mean, we're talking, you might save $5+ per fill-up. That adds up. You can find the app, or you can find the Inner Circle in the app and then go to offers. Download the Circle K app, sign up for the Inner Circle for exclusive offers. New offers, purchase clubs, and sweepstakes are updated weekly. Aaron is right. CSU fans could use a chill mindset right now. Again, keep these questions commenting. Riley on the sticks is starring them. I'm gonna answer a lot of these at the end here. Just want to do the best I can to stay on track so we're not too all over the place. Going back to what we were talking about before the break there, I'm bummed to see Chase Wilson move on. He's a player that I enjoyed covering quite a bit. Really humble dude, just a genuinely good kid. I mean, obviously very religious, constantly cites his faith. And I do think he was a great leader. And I think having him be in your locker room for that transition period certainly would have been beneficial in terms of what he does on the field. Productive player. He's not Shaq Barrett. He's not Al Wilson. I do think there's some validity to him going to a bigger program and maybe getting in a spotlight could help his NFL chances. Could also argue that maybe just playing in this season or in this system one more year and getting 100+ tackles would have helped him get there. Who knows? You wish him the best. I do think, though, you have to factor in that he's already graduated, been with the program half a decade. All his friends are moving on. Very, very human for him to want to see what else is out there and to, potentially, like I said, stay with some of the people that he's tight with. When that's Freddie Banks and, you got Kershke and Newer both going. There'll be some familiar faces there at Wake. We'll see what happens with him. But I don't think you need to panic at linebacker because Owen Long is a rising star. Like Drew Rodriguez a lot. I think they've done a good job with the talent that they've added via the portal. Jacob Ellis, I think, is going to be really productive. 2021 co-defensive player of the year at the JUCO level. He had 9 total turnovers or something crazy like that, like 5 forced fumbles and 4 picks. He's a baller in the right setting. He was 5th in total tackles for Iowa State this last year, started about 6 games. You have some experience there. You also have some up-and-coming young talent. Another guy, Cannon Valenzuela, who's going to be a true freshman. Wouldn't shock me if he plays early on just because he's highly athletic. Fits that Owen Long mold where you were a receiver, you were a DB, running back, whatever at the high school level, but you're a freak athlete. So we're just going to put you at linebacker and take advantage of your athleticism and your versatility. Would not surprise me at all if Cannon Valenzuela gets on the field early. He's a guy who I think has an incredibly bright future. Again, like you're bummed to see Chase move on, but it's not the end of the world. I don't really feel like any of the losses have been devastating. I think the highest ceiling of the players that have moved on is probably Gabe Kershke. I just love his length. Losing a guy that had that type of sack production, that hurts. And I do think you need to go out and add some depth at edge rusher. Kenyon Aggers is a guy you're excited about. You're hoping Kennedy McDowell can kind of develop into the guy that he has the potential to be. I feel like Kennedy needs to gain weight. Great edge rusher, but I think he's got to put on some weight if he's ever going to be a 3-down type player and not just like a dude you bring in a cheetah package situation. But they do have talent there. I'll be interested to see how they approach that moving forward. You have added some talent to the offensive line. You went out and signed Wertman, the multi-year starting offensive tackle out of Central Missouri, 2-time all-conference player. He's probably your starting left tackle next year. I'd like to see them maybe add one more interior offensive lineman potentially. But I also think that O-line is a position where you're going to need to start relying on some of the homegrown guys you have in that room. We've seen that transition process start the last couple of years with like Tanner Morley, Big Aider, Urian Baranchea is a guy that I think has a bright future. They've got some guys that are coming up through the pipeline that I think can be pretty solid, but just given that you're going to be losing 3 starters for that offensive line, I do think that is an area where they could afford to add some depth. Edge rusher, O-line, I mean, defensive tackle, you can never have enough. Maybe safety, especially depending on what happens with Jalen Gardner. We'll kind of see in the spring if he's ultimately able to come back or not. Potentially going to have to medically retire, which would be a bummer because I think he had a pretty bright future, and I think they were anticipating him being a starter next year and moving forward. But I think they're in a pretty good spot, man. I love what they've added in the secondary. CJ Blocker, Jahari Rogers are both former 4-star recruits, both veteran guys that can run well. Lamondre Joe comes from Missouri State, but he's played a ton of football. He's got great ball skills, great production. Not the biggest DB in the world, but he kind of reminds me of Dom Morris, where he's feisty. He's going to get in there. He's going to make plays. They went out and signed the type of corners they're going to need, I believe, to play more aggressive man coverage consistently. I think this defense is going to be disruptive based on what we've seen from Tyson Summers historically. I think they're going to get after the quarterback. I think they're going to cause more havoc and give up more turnovers. I am slightly worried about giving up big plays because of how aggressive that they play. It takes a certain level of talent and discipline to be able to play at that pace and with that type of aggressiveness and not get gashed by draws and screens and stuff like that. Issues that honestly CSU had when Summers was here the first time in 2015. Yeah, they created a lot of turnovers. They were way better against the pass than they had been the year before. They got gashed on the ground for over 200 yards a game. They give up a lot of big plays. So we'll see. I think it's going to be fun. We'll see what the results are, but I think both offensively and defensively, you're going to see a more aggressive style. That can be both a blessing and a curse at times, but just based on everything we've heard from Norvell in terms of personnel dictating the scheme, you went out and you got real athletic at cornerback. You've got athletic backers. I think you're going to press the issue a little bit defensively, and then offensively, I think you open it up more because you do have a third-year starting quarterback in Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, and somebody in the Toyota chat says, any concern with BFN? I'm not sure what you mean in terms of any concern with him leaving. I don't see that happening. He went out in the paper, said I'm a Ram for life in the Denver Post, signed a 6-figure NIL deal this offseason. Like he's making a nice little chunk of change to stay. I think he's got plenty of arm talent. We do need to see him take things to the next level next year, and I think he'll benefit from having more talent at the pass catcher position. They were just in such a weird spot. You went into the year anticipating Torrey Horton getting probably 150 touches. He gets hurt right off the bat. You have some wonky games in September, and then he's essentially playing in a new system altogether with guys that he had no established rapport with. Torrey's injured. Goffney ended up missing most of the year with an illness. We'll see if he's back next year. You had a bunch of young guys, and eventually they established rapport with them. Then they leave for the bowl game. And again, you're in a position where it's like, well, I've got Dane Olson and a bunch of freshmen and sophomores that essentially haven't played. That's not the easiest position to be in. Does he need to be better? Yes. I've talked about him needing to be more consistent with his footwork so that he can be more consistently accurate, because while he does make the big time play, there are times where he misses on the intermediate throw by not setting his feet or by throwing a fastball where the situation doesn't call for it. Like, he has room to grow, and he should. I also think that there are a lot of extenuating circumstances that worked against him. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, if you miss it, I do think they'll have an offensive play caller. If it is Matt Mumme, him and Mumme have a great relationship. A little scoop for you. From what I've heard behind the scenes, it was actually Mumme that called the plays over those final 5 minutes of the comeback against Boise State in 2023. Take that for what you will. Have that from a trusted source, though. I think that would be good for Braden's development. I think having Lewis Brown back is going to be big for him. You know, a legitimate number one receiver with NFL potential. And then if you're able to have any of these other guys pan out, you know, then it's just gravy. Like, Armani Winfield can run with the best of them. He's got a really high ceiling. He needs to be more consistent. Caleb Goody is as much of a burner as he is, as fun as he was to watch, making those big plays in the open field. He's dangerous. He's going to have to be a lot more consistent at Cincinnati if he wants to make the type of impact that, you know, he thinks he's capable of. Like, he's not the most refined route runner. There were times where there were turnovers or incompletions where receivers just didn't fight back to the ball in a way that Torrey would. I think LB makes those type of plays. I think they're going to be better at tight end this year. And I'm not saying that to take shots at Vince Brown. Good dude. Had a daughter this year. I would imagine he ends up closer to her in some capacity. I think the family's in Chicago, but I'm not 100% on that. But, you know, you needed more from that position. Yeah, I think you saw a pretty stark downgrade from Dallin Holker, and you just didn't have guys that consistently got open enough across the middle that made catches. There were a lot of factors that worked against the passing offense outside of just the fact that they were in a more West Coast based run heavy scheme. Like they certainly leaned into that identity. I don't think you go away from that altogether, especially given the talent you have in the backfield. You know, I think Jalen Dupree and Justin Marshall, that's a really electric 1-2 punch with a lot of explosiveness. You bring Van Shield back. They signed a kid from Tulsa as well. That gives you some versatility. So I like what they have really across the board at the skill positions. Maybe some questions about the offensive line, but I think there's an opportunity for the offense to take a leap next year. Like you can't have the turnover problems that you had in 2022 or in the bowl game. Like turnovers were a huge factor there. But you've got talent, at least on paper. Defensively, we'll kind of have to see, because basically it's going to be Dylan Phelps, Lorich, and Aggers as and Owen Long as guys that contributed this year that you're familiar with. Other than that, basically going to be an entirely new crew that can lead to some struggles, especially early on in the year. But I do think playing a more aggressive approach as a whole will be important for this team. And I think that some of the reactions to the defensive change have been a little disingenuous. Like I saw somebody, you know, when it came out that Chase was going into the portal, when it came out that Kershke was going in the portal, Matt Stevens made a post about, you know, is anybody still justifying, you know, Jay Norvell moving on from Freddie Banks? It's not like they were the 85 Bears, guys. Like I think you can argue the defense was the more consistently impactful unit as a whole. But when the lights were brightest in the biggest games, they still got torched. Texas and CU absolutely gashed them. Any type of tempo whatsoever. And you know, they were jello. They were Swiss cheese at that point. I liked a lot of those guys. I wanted a lot of them to stay because I think they had bright futures. You know, I think Kershke has NFL potential. I think Newer Gatkuth, if he can ever stay healthy, can be really talented. But I think some of the reactions here have been a little bit disingenuous because people are a little frustrated with the inconsistencies on the offensive side. I understand that. Again, I'm not saying you sit here and you pound the table for Jay Norvell and this is our Sonny Lubick, this is our hero. But very clearly they've improved. And whether you thought the defense was the strength or not, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is relationships. And you cannot have a functioning football team where the head coach and defensive coordinator hate each other so much to a point to where they barely communicate. I don't even know how much they talked over the last year. That's not how you win. You had to ride it out this year because I think if you would have fired him before the season, you would have lost a lot of these guys to the portal before the year even started. But it was not sustainable long term, and you needed some type of shakeup there. I wish Freddie the best. The dude hates me. I don't know why. Blocked me on Twitter a couple years ago, probably because I'm such an intense critic because I'm so hard on these guys. But I don't know. Some of the reactions to all of this have been very Chicken Little. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. And we all know how that story goes. When you always yell, the sky is falling, then when there's an actual situation, everybody's just going to ignore you. They're going to roll their eyes because you've been yelling that for 2 years. I understand there have been some frustrating moments. It just kind of is what the offseason is now. You lose some players, everybody flips out. You sign a couple players, now everything's great again. Really exciting. One guy, after kind of taking some time, decides, actually, I'm going to leave after all. Everybody goes right back to flipping out. We get closer to camp, the excitement for the season, everybody's bought in, there's hope, there's this, boom, everybody's locked in. Then you lose a game in September, the sky is back to falling. You win a couple of games, we've got all the momentum, everything's perfect. You lose the game, oh man, burn it down. Like, the reactions are just so, like, volatile either way. And I just think we got to have a little bit of perspective in this modern landscape of college football. And I think a lot of very important context at times gets either unintentionally or intentionally omitted because people are trying to have their hot take be correct, basically. And I've said it before, but I do think there is at least a small portion of the fan base who would rather be correct regarding their own pessimism, and they would rather see CSU struggle because that's validation for their glass half empty approach. And because of that, you aren't able to appreciate anything. You can't live in the moment whatsoever. Can't enjoy the first winning season since 2017. Can't enjoy beating multiple rivals for the first time in a decade. Beating Air Force in the Springs for the first time since 2002. And for all the people that love to constantly drum on and on about, oh, they didn't beat anybody. They didn't beat anybody. They lost to those same fucking teams for 10 years, guys. They lost to those same teams. To San Jose State. They lose that game 9 times out of 10 over the last 10 years. They probably lose to New Mexico, given what Dampier and Wysong did against much of the league. I mean, I get we want them to do more. This needs to be the floor, not the ceiling. But it's a trajectory. It's an ascension that takes time. And you don't go from the bottom of the food chain to the king of the hill overnight. It takes time, guys. And for all the people that can't recognize whatsoever any of the growth that there's been, I don't know what to tell you. I don't think you're ever going to be satisfied. I think there's a small portion of the fan base that will just forever be upset. And I think that's sad because that's a crappy way to live. Like, that's not saying that this team is without fault. It's not saying that they aren't without criticism. They failed to show up when the lights were brightest, which has been an issue for CSU as long as I have been alive. You would like to see them figure that out the next couple of years, but to act like they didn't take a major step in the right direction, it's just factually incorrect. And I want them to do more as much as anyone. But I think there are some people that are so determined to get out their pitchforks, to get those torches going, that they're just looking for anything they can to flip out over. And it gets old. It gets old. And maybe my optimism is not for everybody. And again, I don't expect everybody to agree with everything that I say, all my takes or anything like that. Maybe I'm the ignorant one for having any type of optimism whatsoever, given the history of being a CSU supporter has been pretty rough. But hope costs the same. And I would rather be upset when it goes bad rather than just living in that constant state of pessimism and the sky is falling and everything sucks. It's just not a fun way. I don't see how you get any enjoyment out of that type of a fandom whatsoever. And again, people will misconstrue this. They'll say, oh, Justin's saying if you say anything bad about this, then you're wrong. No, they need to achieve more. This needs to be the floor, not the ceiling. But I understand it takes time to reach that ceiling. And I just think so many people want it to happen overnight. This isn't college. This isn't the video game. It takes time. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on it. I'm going to answer some of your questions and comments, and then we're going to call it a day. I'll be going live tomorrow as well. We'll talk more hoops. We'll talk more football. Talk more portal. Got some written content coming out as well. Lot to keep your eyes on. All right. Henry says, what are the odds Jamari Person withdraws from the portal? Is it even an option? It's an option. I actually asked Savage about this in Arizona. Obviously, he's gone now. The only offer he's posted about publicly has been UTEP. UTEP did sign Malachi Nelson from Boise State, so maybe that's a little bit more appealing than it initially was, the quarterback situation there. I think he's probably too stubborn and prideful to come back also at this point. You signed Lewis Brown. You went out and you added Tay Lanier, who was a New Mexico transfer a couple years, who was supposed to end up at CSU, ended up at Northern Arizona the last 2 years for some grades and is now back at CSU. He is going to likely fill that Jamari Person role, in my opinion. So I'm not even sure if there's a spot for him at this point. The NIL money they would have had allocated for him is certainly already spent. But that's the reality of the portal. Is it works out really well for some guys. Caleb Goody got 300,000 plus from Cincinnati. Good for him. For a lot of guys, they don't even find a new landing spot, let alone a payday. You wish him well, but I do not anticipate that Jamari Person will be back, although it is theoretically possible. Reed says, should we expect Caden Branston to play first year? It's possible. He's one of the guys I'm most excited about from this signing class. Actually, I like him and Murray a lot, both the defensive linemen coming out of Arizona. I've already talked about Valenzuela. I think the talent they have coming in on the defensive side of the ball is highly intriguing. I think they're more athletic on the defensive side of the ball significantly so than they were when Norvell came in. Hanging on to some guys like Boom and Newer would have been big. Kershke, because those were some of the additions that you were able to bolster that athleticism with. But the staff does a really good job of finding guys that translate athletically. And Branston is a guy who has the frame. He's versatile too. He can play inside or outside, which you might need that this year. You're going to be thin there, but it's certainly a possibility. It's just tough in the trenches. Offensive line and defensive line, probably the hardest positions to make an immediate impact as a true freshman. There's just such a big gap in terms of how much you're expected to process. The playbook is so much deeper. And obviously, you're going up against significantly bigger individuals than you were at the high school level. It's just a big jump. It takes some time. Shout out to the homie Mile High Minute says, how are you feeling about the good start to the conference schedule for men's basketball? Has lineup change had a huge impact? Will CSU make the NIT, you think? More likely to make the NIT than the tournament at this point. Probably going to have to win the Mountain West tournament to have any hope for reaching the NCAAs. You still got some work to do to offset some of those bad losses from the non-conference slate. But yeah, I mean, if you finish top 4, top 5 in the Mountain West, get a first round bye in the Mountain West tournament, I would think at the very minimum you get an NIT bid, hopefully more. I've said in the preseason that CSU will win the Mountain West tournament. That was obviously a throwing a dart, crapshoot prediction, but would be funny if I hit it. I think the women's team has a pretty good chance as well. My guy Aaron, when Summers was here last, do you think he gave up big plays because of the defensive style or because of Bobo's tempo passing offense that kept the D on the field? Maybe a little bit of both, but I think those are both going to be factors for CSU, especially if CSU opens up the offense and goes more to at least closer to an air raid style approach passing offense. You're going to play more tempo. I think a lot of what helped the defense have more success this year was being on the field less. I think that's a factor. I just think the aggressive style, when you blitz as much as Summers does, when you play that much man coverage, inherently you're going to be susceptible to the big play. So I guess if I had to pick one, it's style more than anything. You also cause more havoc. You're able to create more game-changing plays the other way. It's just, can you end up net positive? Can you make more plays than you give up? And that's what it'll come down to for CSU. Certainly would help their cause if the offense was more consistent, scoring more points, creating more explosives, all of that stuff as well. Dominic says, On 3 has Lloyd Avant committed. Not sure if you've talked about that already, but thoughts? Yeah, I saw last night the Tulsa running back Lloyd Avant committed to CSU. I don't know if that's official in terms of whether he's signed yet. I need to get some clarity there. I'm going to have to talk about him more tomorrow. I know he's a guy that got some run as a true freshman, had an offer from CSU out of high school. I'll have to focus more on him tomorrow, to be honest. He's not a guy that I have a ton of info on as of now. It's tough in this portal era, man, trying to keep up on everything in terms of who's signing, who's going. Some kids announce, some kids don't. Trying to be respectful of that as well, give kids their moments, but other kids aren't going to post, and I want to keep you guys up to date. It's a whole balance. Henry says, what are your thoughts on the additions for the Mountain West, Northern Illinois, UC Davis, etc.? They've added really good schools academically that I think that's a factor you have to consider as well. And I don't want to be too judgy. I would rather be associated with the brands in the Pac-12. And I think based on the additions the Mountain West has made, I think it hurts the argument for those that were like, see, these brands are all the same. They should just merge. There's a pretty clear-cut difference there between being with Washington State, Boise State, and San Diego State, Gonzaga on the hoop side, than UC Davis and Northern Illinois and all that kind of stuff. I think the Mountain West was in a really tough spot. I think they've done a good job of doing the best that they can to stay afloat, to remain relevant. I think the future is not as bright for the Mountain West. And I think we've seen the peak in terms of the league's relevancy on a national level, if that makes sense. Chris says, what happened to Jalen Gardner? How are things shaping up at safety with Howell Blackburn gone? I believe it's a neck injury, which is scary, obviously. And the weird thing is at one point in the season, Norvell kind of made it seem like he was pretty close to coming back, like maybe a week or two. Maybe there was some type of setback. Maybe they discovered something that was previously unknown. But from my understanding, it's a neck situation, which obviously you've got to take that really seriously, and you wish him the best either way. I mean, as great of an opportunity to play college football must be, like, these guys are in their 20s. Like, they got to think about their whole life. So we'll see what happens there. Depth of safety, a little bit of a concern if Gardner isn't back. I think they're really high on Vincent. Maybe you'd slide a guy over from corner. Maybe Aiden Hector, I could see a guy being transition to safety potentially, especially if you feel good about what you've got in the nickel. But that is one of the positions I'm kind of interested to see how it changes and who like ultimately ends up back there. It is a question mark at this point who will be starting. Josh Savage recruited Arizona hard too. Does Finley take Arizona too, or does someone else take that spot? Probably depends on who they hire, to be honest, like where their regional ties are. If you hire a wide receiver coach that has deep ties to Arizona, then Arizona is probably going to be their lead area. I think ideally you find someone who has ties to Arizona and Southern California, and maybe Norvell has someone in his Rolodex from the Nevada staff, something like that. But yeah, I don't think we can necessarily answer that yet based on who the staff is. Casey, do you think we see any legit competition between BFN and Darius Curry heading into next year? I know BFN is the guy, but Curry adds athleticism to the position. I think it's BFN's job to lose. I don't think it'll be a true open competition. I don't think you give a guy the type of NIL money that you did if it was going to be an open competition. Maybe I'm wrong, but no, I don't think Curry is legitimately going to be in the mix for that QB1 role. And if anybody was, more realistically, it would probably be Jackson Brousseau, who is the backup quarterback this year. Another guy who throws the ball really well. But I fully anticipate that week one, BFN is the starter. I just don't foresee any changes there. How many more transfers are we looking to add? Rough split on offense, defense. Well, before you lost Wilson and Kershke, I think still post Boom, Jock, and Newer, Jay said there was a possibility of adding around 15 transfers. They're probably close to that now, but given what you've lost, you maybe add 1 to 2 more. I mean, there's always PWOs and stuff that you can add into the mix as well. But in terms of like impact players that would factor into the starting mix, I think you could look for maybe another safety. Again, I'd like to add an interior offensive lineman and an edge rusher, so maybe 2 to 3, give or take, depending on what could happen there. But I think they've done a good job of hitting on most of the positions of need: tight end, receiver, cornerback, which was a big one. Plus, you get Jackson Warren back at tight end, which I've seen some people comment in the Toyota chat. He was supposed to be your star addition. He's a freak, like 6'8", 250, big dude, converted quarterback. He's roommates with BFN. They've got a great relationship. He is who I would anticipate being tight end 1, but then you also bring over Carlos Anaya from Wofford and Rocky Beers from Florida International. I think they got better at those positions. I think they're better at tight end and receiver than they were at least going into the league slate last year. Like, obviously a healthy Torrey Horton is number 1. But given that you basically didn't have Torrey for most of the year, like, I like the spot that they're in at the skill positions going into next season, better than they were for most of this year. All right, that's all I've got for you guys this morning. I appreciate everybody that was rocking with us in the Toyota chat. It was really popping this morning. We will talk more if about some of this stuff tomorrow. I'm actually going to record an audio only podcast with Kevin Lytle this afternoon, so tweet at me if you want me to focus on something with him. Going live tomorrow at 10 a.m. Shout out to all you. Stay safe out there. Stay warm. Always proud to be. Hope this podcast helped put a smile at least on some of your faces. Much love, y'all. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.